My sister didn't steal my wedding dress. She turned it into curtains and asked if I wanted to see them swish. I lived in Round Rock, Texas, 30 minutes from the downtown skyline. I kept promising to enjoy more. I was 29, a public librarian who liked labeled bins and clean endings. The dress waited in my closet inside a breathable garment bag, ivory crepe that made me feel taller than I was. The wedding was 8 weeks out, the venue deposit already paid, the seamstress booked for final fittings. You might think weddings are about love, but logistically they are about lead times. Show up late to one deadline, and the rest tumble. Here's the archetype: the golden child who believes beauty is communal property and consequences are private myths. In that story, sister often means a person who treats your preparedness as a pantry. She doesn't break in, she just borrows reality. You've seen her before. She enters a room, and gravity bends toward her urgency. Rules are sand. Her feelings are granite. When she's short on cash or time, the nearest person with a calendar becomes her project manager. If you're the reliable one, you know this dance already. Apologize, absorb, reset, repeat. A week earlier, Jenna had moved into a North Austin fourplex with a landlord who wrote emails like parking citations. Window coverings required by Friday or fines will accrue. The apartment had big, bright windows that poured heat like a griddle. She sent me a text with a photo, bare glass, a tape measure, a grin. I read it on my lunch break between reshelving true crime paperbacks and leading a workshop on how to print boarding passes. I told her to try a thrift store, or Target, or literally any option that didn't involve my closet. She replied with a heart emoji and radio silence, which in her dialect meant, I heard you, but I won't comply. Here's another archetype: the caretaker who thinks calm will fix chaos. That person, maybe you, underestimates how quickly a small, sure I'll help, becomes a staircase of obligations. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace. What you're really keeping is a system where the loudest need wins. You can feel that in your stomach right now, can't you? I opened Jenna's door on Saturday with a spare key sheet pressed into my hand for emergencies. She was proud, barefoot, and waving a stapler. Sunlight drifted through ivory panels that I knew by touch. The bodice seams formed a neat rectangle. The train split into 2 long curtains, hemmed with iron-on tape. It was just sitting there, she said, like an used men unowned. In that moment, time split, the version where I screamed, and the version I chose. Inventory the ruins, name the costs, and remember that vendors, unlike family, respond to invoices. I counted the rings on the tension rod and breathed. Jenna smiled. The curtain swayed. I didn't shout. I did what caretakers do when the room tilts. I made a list. Photos first, then measurements, then a call to Luz, my seamstress, who spoke in solutions the way some people speak in gossip. Jenna floated around me narrating like a tour guide. It's actually chic, she said, fluffing the train-turn panels. The archetype came into focus. The minimizer who converts harm into a quirky anecdote. In her logic, impact shrank to fit the story she could survive. You've heard it. It's not theft, it's repurposing. It's not a burned bridge, it's a vibe change. If you've ever swallowed your anger to appear reasonable, you know how quickly your restraint becomes someone else's permission slip. Luz called me back within minutes. Bring everything, even scraps, she said. The fixer archetype is disciplined optimism. She doesn't promise miracles, she promises process. Her questions were unglamorous. How much fabric remained? Where were the seams cut? Could we source matching crepe? Could the bodice be rebuilt? You might think solutions live in dramatic gestures, but honest repair lives in boring details. That's where dignity hides when spectacle takes over. Jenna perched on the arm of her couch, toes swinging, already pitching alternatives. Maybe just get another dress? I'll Venmo a little, and Mom can cover some, and Mark won't care. That's the bargain. She offers partial restitution tethered to your tolerance. The offer is less about righting the wrong and more about keeping the relationship in a non-confrontational pose. If you're nodding along, it's because you've been asked to price your boundaries like a yard sale. The sticker always starts too low. I took the curtains down in silence while the landlord emailed again, this time a reminder that temporary solutions are acceptable pending installation. Bureaucracy, for all its faults, can be a boundary you borrow. I forwarded the email to Jenna and attached a link to a $20 blackout panel set. Order these today, I said. Not a suggestion, a task. That move matters. The caretaker becomes the tactician when they replace soothing with structure. You set deadlines. You require receipts. You stop running interference for someone else's chaos and start charging for your time. Back in my car, I zipped the panels into the garment bag like I was tucking in a patient. I texted Mark a photo with a single line. Emergency at Luz's Monday. His reply was steady. Whatever you need. The truth is, partners watch how you handle small violations. You teach people how to treat your future by how you defend your present. I set Luz's address in my maps, opened my budgeting app, and created a new line item. Salvage plus rush fees. The list grew, but so did my spine. I wasn't going to litigate Jenna's character. I was going to invoice her choices. Monday morning, Luz spread the fabric across her long oak table like an autopsy. The ivory crepe looked alive in some parts and shredded in others, the seams ripped with no care for salvage. She tapped the bodice with her pencil. This we can rebuild, she said, but it will not be the same dress. It will be a new one born from this one. That's the maker archetype. She accepts damage without sentimentality, then translates it into craft. If you've ever sat across from someone who solves problems with their hands instead of their emotions, you know the calm it brings. I told her about the timeline, the fittings, the venue that already had my measurements on file for the dress code. Luz listened without commentary, just pitting swatches against the ruined panels. She explained sourcing options. Order matching fabric from New York or choose a lace overlay that disguised the cuts. Each option came with costs, money, time, compromise. Archetypes thrive here too. The planner knows every trade-off carries a shadow. When you pick speed, you sacrifice purity. When you pick beauty, you risk budget. You can't have all three. Meanwhile, Jenna filled my phone with texts. You're overreacting. It wasn't personal. You'll thank me for forcing a change. This is the justifier archetype. She recasts destruction as opportunity, as though pain is a gift you didn't recognize. If you've ever had someone tell you your boundaries were too rigid, you know the sting of having your discipline painted as a flaw. And here's the real catch. Sometimes you almost believe them, because self-doubt loves an invitation. Mark met me at Luz's after work, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He didn't touch the fabric. He just looked at me and said, "Pick what makes you feel like you again. We'll handle the bill." The supporter archetype isn't about fixing the problem. It's about reinforcing the person in the middle of it. And maybe you've learned this too. Partnership isn't proven in candlelit dinners, but in errands and invoices, and standing next to you when your own family makes you a cautionary tale. I chose the lace overlay. It was elegant, slightly different from my original dream, but strong enough to mask the seams Jenna had carved through. Luz nodded, started marking cuts, and told me to return Friday. On the drive home, I realized I hadn't yet decided whether Jenna would be invited to the wedding. That thought sat in the passenger seat like an unclaimed bag, silent, heavy, waiting. By Thursday, the group chat with my bridesmaids was buzzing about hair trials, hotel blocks, and the bachelorette dinner. I typed quick responses, all cheerful and neutral, because the last thing I wanted was for this story to leak into their excitement. But beneath the emojis, my mind looped on a single question. What happens when loyalty to family collides with loyalty to yourself? That's the archetype of the boundary keeper, someone who learns that silence isn't always grace, it's sometimes complicity. I hadn't spoken directly to Jenna since the curtain reveal. Every text she sent skated between apology and provocation. 1 minute, "You know I didn't mean harm." The next, "Honestly, you were never that attached to it." People like her rely on your exhaustion. They don't need you to agree. They just need you to give up the fight. And if you've ever caved just to stop the noise, you know how that surrender tastes, like chalk in your throat. Mark watched me delete one of her messages without replying. "You don't have to prove anything to her," he said. He meant it kindly, but here's the truth. Every sibling dynamic runs deeper than current events. I wasn't only fighting about fabric. I was fighting about years of her taking and me repairing. Weddings have a way of dragging family archetypes into the spotlight. The scapegoat, the star, the fixer. You might see yourself in one of those roles right now, nodding as if you've lived the script. Friday came, and Luz unveiled the reconstructed gown. The lace overlay shimmered faintly under her shop lights, the train shorter but dignified. I slipped it on in the fitting room, expecting to mourn what I'd lost. Instead, I felt taller. Different, yes, but anchored. Luz pinned the hem, nodded, and said simply, "This is yours again." That line matters. The moment when reclamation outweighs resentment. Driving home with the garment bag beside me, I realized I'd been preparing for a confrontation with Jenna. But the confrontation might not look like yelling. It might look like disinviting her, or like handing her the bill. Either way, the archetype shifts. From caretaker to architect. You stop reacting. You start designing what comes next. And design, unlike reaction, requires choice. The invoice from Luz came on Saturday morning. I stared at the line items: fabric, lace overlay, rush labor, and the total that made my stomach twist. It wasn't impossible to cover, but it was enough to remind me that damage always has a price. I forwarded it to Jenna with a short note. "This is the cost of your decision. I expect you to pay it." That was the voice of the enforcer archetype. Not cruel, not pleading, just factual. If you've ever shifted from, "Why did you do this?" to, "Here's what it costs," you know how liberating that pivot feels. Her reply came quick. "You're seriously charging me?" Families don't nickel and dime each other. That line revealed her role as the entitled rebel. She thrives on flipping the frame. What she did wasn't the problem. My response was, "You might have experienced this yourself. Someone insists that accountability is petty, while their violation is rebranded as no big deal. It's a strategy to keep you defending your feelings instead of naming their actions." Mark read over my shoulder, jaw tight. "Send it certified mail if she won't pay," he said. That's the protector. He doesn't get lost in the swirl of emotions. He keeps the path clear. In relationships, protectors don't always roar. Sometimes they just keep the paperwork moving. It reminded me that dignity doesn't always arrive in a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it arrives in envelopes. That afternoon, my mother called. She had the concerned tone of someone already briefed. "Honey, it's just fabric," she said gently. And there it was, the archetype of the peacemaker. She wanted harmony at any cost, which really meant my cost. She suggested maybe Jenna had acted out of stress. Maybe I could forgive. Maybe I could let it slide. If you've been in that spot, you know the sting of realizing peacekeepers often ask the most responsible person to pay the balance for everyone else's comfort. I listened, thanked her for caring, and ended the call before resentment spilled over. Then I looked at the garment bag hanging in the corner of my room. The dress was no longer just attire. It had become evidence of who I was willing to be, and who I was no longer willing to clean up after. The wedding was 6 weeks away. The question now wasn't whether the dress would be ready. It was whether Jenna would have a seat to watch me wear it. The guest list sat open on my laptop that night, a spreadsheet of names and meal choices and hotel confirmations. Next to Jenna, I hovered over the delete key. Weddings aren't just about two people. They're auditions for how families will live together afterward. The archetype here is the gatekeeper. You decide who gets to witness your milestones, and by extension, who gets permission to shape your future memories. If you've ever hesitated before hitting send on an invite, you know the weight of that role. Mark leaned against the doorway while I stared at the screen. "Do you want her there?" he asked. He didn't say should or must. He asked what I wanted. That subtle shift matters. He gave me authorship, not obligation. I realized no one else had asked me that question directly. Not Mom, not Jenna. When you've always been the fixer, people assume your choices will bend to keep the system intact. But systems can change when you change your posture. The next day, Jenna sent a long message, a flood of words that bounced between apology, nostalgia, and defensiveness. "Remember when we used to play dress up? I thought you'd understand. I didn't mean to ruin it. You're making me the villain." That's the performer archetype. She staged herself as misunderstood heroine, hoping I'd slip into the role of cruel judge. If you've ever been cast in someone else's script, you know the itch to rewrite it mid-scene. I typed a single response. "You cut up my dress. You haven't paid the invoice. This isn't about me making you a villain. It's about you refusing to be accountable." Sending that message felt less like confrontation and more like release. Boundaries aren't always barbed wire. Sometimes they're just clear signage. You can't stop someone from crossing a line, but you can stop pretending the line doesn't exist. That evening, I called my maid of honor, Rachel. I told her everything, not the polished version, but the full mess. She didn't offer advice. She just said, "Whatever you decide about Jenna, we'll make it work." That's the companion archetype. She doesn't push or pull. She stabilizes. And if you've ever felt seen in the middle of chaos, you know how that steadiness can feel like oxygen. The list still glowed on my laptop, cursor blinking next to Jenna's name. For the first time, I didn't feel paralyzed. I felt like the choice was mine alone, and that realization was its own kind of invitation. A week later, the RSVP deadline passed. Jenna hadn't responded, hadn't paid, and hadn't called. Silence can be louder than shouting. It was her way of daring me to chase her, to resume the old choreography where she acted out and I played mediator. That's the archetype of the provoker, someone who uses withdrawal as bait. If you've ever been tempted to fix silence just to feel in control again, you know the exhaustion it brings. Meanwhile, the rest of the wedding machine rolled on. Rachel scheduled the final dress fitting. Mark's parents booked a block of rooms near the venue. My aunt texted me about dessert options, as if the entire family wasn't vibrating with unspoken tension. This is how family systems work. One loud rupture, a dozen polite detours. Everyone pretends normal, while one person quietly carries the fracture. You might have lived this yourself, balancing joy and resentment in the same week, the same hour, even the same breath. At work, shelving books gave me space to think. I kept circling the same realization. Letting Jenna attend would send a message, so would excluding her. Either way, I wasn't just making a choice about seating charts. I was declaring the value of boundaries in front of everyone who'd raised us, judged us, and excused us. That's the teacher archetype. Your actions become a lesson, even if you never explain it out loud. Mark and I met Luz for the final fitting on Friday. The lace overlay hugged just right. The hem kissed the floor without dragging. Luz smiled, clipped the last thread, and said, "Now it belongs to you again." I carried the garment bag out of her shop with both hands, like it was heavy, though it wasn't. Symbolism has weight even when fabric doesn't. That night, I opened the guest list once more. I scrolled down to Jenna. My finger hovered over the delete key again, but this time the hesitation was gone. I clicked. The row vanished. My chest felt light, not guilty. Invitations aren't entitlements. They're privileges, and privileges can be revoked when respect is. As I shut the laptop, Mark reached for my hand. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. Because certainty isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to stop negotiating with it. The fallout came fast. Mom called within 2 days, her voice clipped, as if she'd rehearsed. "Your sister says you uninvited her. Is that true?" I told her it was. There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone choosing sides. She tried to soften it with phrases like family unity and lifelong bonds, but the subtext was clear. I was expected to bend so everyone else could breathe easier. That's the archetype of the appeaser. She treats fairness as optional if harmony is at stake. If you've been the one pressured to be the bigger person, you know how unfair that demand feels. Jenna followed with her own call, laced with sarcasm. "Wow, really? Curtains cost me a wedding invite?" But that's the trick. She wanted to frame it as punishment over fabric, not a consequence of choices. That's the deflector archetype. They can't hold the weight of their actions, so they redirect it back onto you. If you've ever had someone tell you that you're overreacting while they ignore the actual damage, you recognize this dance. I kept my answer short. This isn't about the dress. It's about trust. You broke it. You didn't fix it. Silence stretched. Then she laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You're dramatic. Fine. Enjoy your perfect little wedding." The call ended with a kind of finality that sounded like a slammed door. And yet, for once, I didn't feel smaller after her exit. I felt clear. Mark found me in the kitchen afterward, my hand still gripping the counter. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. Because clarity isn't joy, but it is relief. Weddings teach you something subtle. Love doesn't just mean adding people to your circle. It also means subtracting the ones who can't respect the space. The next morning, Rachel dropped by with coffee and pastries. She listened while I replayed both calls, then leaned back and said, "She'll spin this however she wants. But people notice who shows up for you and who doesn't." That's the witness archetype, the friend who reminds you that truth doesn't always need defending. Sometimes it just needs living. I set the dress on the closet door hook, unzipped the bag, and let the lace catch the light. It no longer looked like a replacement. It looked like a decision, stitched together with every boundary I had finally chosen to enforce. The wedding week arrived like a freight train, suddenly and with no breaks. Guests trickled into town, hotel rooms filled, and the venue called daily with final confirmations. On the surface, everything sparkled. Underneath, a quiet current ran. Everyone knew Jenna wasn't coming. Some relatives tiptoed around it, others asked directly, and a few whispered as if her absence were a scandal. That's the archetype of the chorus. They narrate events from the sidelines, trying to shape the story for themselves. If you've ever been the subject of family gossip, you know how quickly others' interpretations spread. At the rehearsal dinner, my uncle pulled me aside. "Shame about your sister," he muttered, eyes soft but edged with judgment. I smiled politely, the kind of smile that ends conversations without starting fights. Because here's the thing, not every accusation deserves a defense. Sometimes silence is the sharper answer. That's the strategist archetype. You save your words for moments that matter. The morning of the wedding, I slipped into the dress with Rachel's steady hands guiding the zipper. The lace overlay hugged me in ways the original gown never had. It carried history, repair, choice. I caught my reflection in the mirror, expecting to see loss. Instead, I saw authorship. The dress wasn't a reminder of what Jenna destroyed. It was proof of what I rebuilt. Mark's face when he saw me before the ceremony sealed it. He didn't see the edits, or the invoices, or the drama. He saw me, whole and unshaken. That's the partner archetype. Someone who looks past the noise to anchor you in the present. You may know that look yourself, the one that makes every earlier decision feel justified. During the vows, my voice held steady. I spoke promises not just to Mark but to myself, to stop cushioning other people's chaos, to stop confusing forgiveness with erasure, to stop inviting harm just because it wore familiar shoes. That's the turning point for the boundary keeper. They stop rehearsing survival and start living design. When the reception roared to life, music, clinking glasses, the scrape of chairs on the floor, I scanned the room and didn't feel a gap where Jenna should have been. I felt space. Open, breathable space. And sometimes, that's the gift absence gives. As the night wound down, I stood with Mark on the edge of the dance floor, watching our friends laugh and our parents sway to music they'd once played in our childhood kitchens. My dress moved with me, lace catching the light. No longer a salvage job but a symbol. People complimented it, none the wiser to its history. Only I knew what it had survived. That's the survivor archetype, the one who carries scars invisibly but with strength. If you've ever worn something remade and felt it fit better than the original, you know how triumph can come dressed as compromise. Jenna never showed. She never sent a check, never sent a note, not even a last-minute text. Her absence didn't ruin anything. It clarified everything. Families often expect endurance, as if blood ties outweigh all other contracts. But what they forget is that boundaries are their own kind of inheritance, something you pass forward when you stop letting history dictate your choices. In quiet moments, I caught myself wondering if she was at home, looking out through those makeshift curtains. Maybe she told herself a story where she was wronged, where I was cruel. Maybe she even believed it. That's her archetype to carry. Mine had shifted. I was no longer the caretaker absorbing storms. I was the architect, building a life where respect was the entry fee. Mark squeezed my hand as the last song played. "We did it," he said. Simple words, but layered. We had built a wedding, yes. But more than that, I had built a boundary, stitched as tightly as the seams in my gown. And boundaries, unlike fabric, don't fray when you guard them well. As we left that night under a canopy of sparklers, I realized something. The story of the dress wasn't a tragedy. It was a blueprint. A reminder that what gets cut apart can be reassembled stronger, if you're willing to claim the scissors for yourself. The ending wasn't about what Jenna had taken. It was about what I finally chose to keep.